Welcome, and thank you for joining us at WCAT. I'm Terence, Delehanty, the town's chief of police. 2 years ago, this community experienced an awful hate crime when two of our own black residents were gunned down on Shirley Street by a person whose heart and soul was filled with hate towards our black and Jewish community populations. We promised the families of David Green and Ramona Cooper that we would never forget the loss of their lives. Nearing the 2-year anniversary of this horrendous act of senseless violence, I thought it was a good time to renew our commitments and continue the conversation about hate. Today's distinguished panel is joining me to discuss hate crimes and hate incidences. Now let me introduce our panelists. To my immediate right, District Attorney Kevin Hayden. Thank you, District Attorney, for joining us.
Thank you.
To his right, Lieutenant Tim O'Connor from the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, assigned there by the Massachusetts State Police. Thank you for joining us. To his right is Agent Chenee Castruita.
Yep.
Yeah, no?
Castruita. Yep,
Castruita, thank you. I hate to mess up names, I apologize. Now to my left is the Anti-Defamation League, Peg Shukur.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us. And of course, to her left is Andrea Baez, who needs no introduction here in Winthrop, our chairperson for the Commission of Diversity, Equity, and Public Relations. Thank you for joining us. And to her left, of course, the backbone of any crisis in Winthrop has been Meredith Hurley, our Public Health Director. Meredith, again, thank you for joining us as well. I think we have set this up to be a roundtable discussion, and of course, I will start with what I consider my boss when it comes to crimes, the District Attorney and the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of Suffolk County, Kevin Hayden. Again, welcome back to Winthrop. It's so happy to have you back in Winthrop on a much more cheerful occasion than we normally see each other.
That's right. Good to see
in
you.
Winthrop. As the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, District Attorney of Suffolk County, what is the difference between hate crimes and hate incidences?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for hosting this. Thank you for having all of us, having me. When I first got the appointment for Suffolk County DA, you were one of the first people to reach out to me, one of the first people to say, let's meet. And I'm glad we did that early on. I really appreciate it. Appreciate you and all you do. There is, a hate crime happens anytime you have some sort of overact, some crime that's been committed that has some sort of animus or bias towards race, class, color, creed, sexual orientation associated with it. When you have that overt act coupled with that with that motive, bias motive, then you have a hate crime. Then you have a civil rights violation. Hate incidents can often happen in incidents where a crime isn't committed. Most often it happens when someone is exercising their right to free speech, no matter how repulsive that speech may be. That is where you see the divergence between protesting, between the right to free speech, and hate incidences that don't give rise to a hate crime. We have to remember that going back to as early as, or as recently, I should say, as 1990, it was legal to burn a cross on somebody's lawn. That was not considered a violation of the law. So we still have a long way to go, but we've come a long way as well. But as it stands right now, no matter how repulsive speech may be, if it doesn't give rise to an attendant and related crime, it often will not give rise to a hate crime or a civil rights violation.
Great, thank you for that explanation. I think a lot of people don't understand the difference, and they automatically assume law enforcement's not responding to their need when in fact there is no crime.
Right.
So thank you. I think that's helpful to the public to understand the difference between and what we can do. What's your office doing to enhance prosecutions for hate crimes, I guess? We've seen a lot of it recently in Boston. and other communities throughout Suffolk County as well as throughout Massachusetts. I know you're very proactive when it comes to this type of
Sure.
incidences.
Yeah, and sure, and, and at the outset, it's understandable when members of the public may not necessarily understand what we're able to do and not do from a law enforcement perspective when hate incidents happen, because we're all outraged by it, right? We don't find it acceptable. We took a stand last July when white supremacist groups marched on our Boston Common. Other than an incident that was investigated involving one individual, no other crime was committed there. But we were as repulsed by it as we would have been as if a crime had been committed. And I think, thankfully, here in Boston, here in Suffolk County, here in Winthrop, we have spoken loud and clear that that's not okay. That having been said, we recognize statistically in Suffolk County and across Massachusetts that incidents involving hate crimes and involving hate incidents are on the rise. I don't think it's just us. I think it's a nationwide thing. I think it has to do, quite frankly, with some of our national leadership in recent years and the tone and the nature of conversations that have gone on across our nation. There is certainly a rise in these sorts of incidents, hate incidents and hate crimes. We see it clearly, particularly in our Jewish community. I think we was at a meeting just early this week with a 30% rise, about 30% rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts this year. That's unbelievable. That's repugnant. It's hard to believe, but it is true. And so we have to come against those things. We've established a civil rights unit in our office to address hate crimes, and we're doing that at both the district court and the superior court level. So we have both superior court prosecutors and district court prosecutors that are handling now cases that we believe are civil rights violations and/or hate crimes. And we do both for a reason, because oftentimes there are incidents that happen that certainly give rise to a hate crime, but they may not give rise to indictment, right? So we have to have our district courts be as equally as prepared for these incidents as we do with the far more serious events like what happened here or what happened in the Jewish community a couple years ago with a rabbi that was stabbed. We have graffiti, hateful graffiti that is plastered on a church just last weekend. That's a crime. Tagging, crime, hate, together with it, that's a civil rights crime, right? So we have to address those at every level.
You just mentioned 30% rise anti-Semitic hate incidences. Do you think that's underreported? Do you think that's accurate report when you're looking at all hate crimes? And why do you think it might be underreported, if you do think that way?
I would bet my life that it's underreported. I don't know that for sure. We're speaking anecdotally here, but you just think of the reasons why someone might not speak up. There's the fear of future retaliation, right? There's the stigma of potentially not being believed or not being taken seriously or not wanting to have to re-traumatize yourself or a group of people over what may have happened. Unfortunately, sometimes maybe the mentality of just wanting to avoid any further conflict, I think, often comes to play. I think it often comes into play for minority groups, for people of color, for Jewish people, where we naturally don't want to create further controversy, as hard as that may be sometimes. And that's where people like me, people like you, people like everyone around this table need to stand up and speak out against these instances and recognize that they are underreported.
Knowing that there's election season is going to be in full bloom locally as well as nationally, what's your thoughts? Are you worried about that? Are you worried about increase in hateful rhetoric from people running for office?
Well, I don't know if I'm worried necessarily, but I know we've got to be ever vigilant, right? And we have to be ever vigilant also recognizing that, there are certain freedoms, and the First Amendment being one of them, that does need to be protected. And that's a very hard line to walk sometimes. particularly when speech may be offensive, speech may be controversial, but I think we can rest assured that we're going to see that nationally in the upcoming elections. I think we'll see it here in Suffolk County with elections that are happening locally as well. There are a lot of real issues at stake, and they have to deal with exactly the things that we're talking about here that give rise to a horrible incident like the one that we're really here talking about. Hate and racism and anti-Semitism, sexism, animus towards people because of their sexual orientation. It's alive and well in our nation. We can't deny it. We have to confront it head on. We have to be willing to call it out, and we have to be willing, as we've seen here in this wonderful community in Winthrop, to respond with loving kindness and respond with compassion, but also respond with unequivocal voices that we won't stand for hate in our communities.
Yeah, I know being on the front lines of those protests and demonstrations, it's very difficult to police. And we have to be ever so careful to not violate someone's constitutional rights, because it impacts not just the police officers, it impacts the financial stability of the communities when they are being sued in federal court as well. So we get plenty of advice ahead of those demonstrations. We have had them in Winthrop for 10 weeks. That we worried every Thursday on that. So thank you. Just returning on transition over to the Mass State Police, Lieutenant. Thank you again for being with us. And again, Suffolk County DA's detectives play such an integral role with the Winthrop Police Department. And we're very grateful and thankful, and we seem to be one and not two separate departments when we work on incidences, and we're grateful for that. I know we can't talk about the incident because it's still an open investigation. Correct. But let's talk about what support do you give a community during a horrible incident such as we experienced?
Right. So in Massachusetts, the District Attorney's Office has statutory jurisdictional role of death investigations. Each District Attorney's Office is assigned a unit of state police detectives, which, along with the assistant district attorneys in that office, conduct these investigations. So we would conduct any homicide death investigation in the county, particularly in Winthrop, Revere, Chelsea, state property in the city of Boston, and the Seaport District. And if there is a hate element, to that crime of violence, we would certainly investigate that as well.
And how do you determine the fact it was a hate crime or not a hate crime, generally, as a general investigator?
Yeah, well, we would have to, look into the motive as to why this person committed the crime that they did. What was their motivation? Was it based on to intimidate somebody, or because of their race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, etc.
Great. Have you seen more of these incidences? I know you do mostly homicides. Right. But have there been more incidences since the incident in Winthrop where Suffolk County DA's homicide squad had to get involved in?
We have not, no.
Okay.
And we would certainly support our local partners if they had incidents and they requested that were not homicide. We would be more than willing to come and assist them in those investigations. But we haven't had much, since this.
And we're grateful for that.
Yeah.
But certainly, you've been very helpful, even when there wasn't a crime involved, to come in and review our work.
Correct.
And so that's an asset to us, that when we want clarity, we want to be transparent, we want to make sure the local police department has done everything they could. Your department will come in at the request through the district attorney's office, of course, to review that work.
Right.
And you have done that for us.
We have, and it's a team effort with our local partners to make sure that the communities are getting the best police services and in investigations we can provide them.
Thank you. And again, anything you want to add, please feel free to add. We'll do a speed round at the end to close up things, so I'll give you time to think about it,
Thanks,
Lieutenant.
Chief.
And then we'll move right on over to our federal partners, the FBI. And thank you again, Chenee, for being here and joining us. Brian LeBlanc was part of one of the people that we consulted with when we had this incident in Winthrop, and I know you're working very closely with him. And so, again, you're a valuable asset to us as a local community, as a small department especially. We have to rely on our state police partners and our federal partners and to fully get things investigated sometimes. So thank you.
Thank you.
When will the FBI get involved if there's a hate incident or hate crime?
So first, thank you for having us here. This is such an important conversation to have, and we really appreciate the invitation. In terms of when the FBI gets involved, a lot of the times hate crimes are reported first to local and state law enforcement, and they in turn will report it to the FBI. And then we will work with those state and local law enforcement partners and the U.S. Attorney's Office to determine whether or not federal charges are appropriate, or a federal investigation is warranted.
On the heels of that statement, on the federal side, what is a hate crime?
So to echo some of what's already been said, a hate crime is a crime that is committed with a primary or at least part motivation being the individual's bias against a certain group, and that bias can be against a certain race or ethnicity or gender identity, for example.
Okay. And of course, the Matthew Shepard law is one of the federal statutes that we all go by and we all look to for guidance in. So I don't.
Yes. Yeah. So our the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009 is probably one of the more commonly known ones, right? And it was named after Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr., both victims of terrible hate crimes. That law prohibits anyone from causing bodily injury or attempting to cause bodily injury to someone based on their race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity. So that one, I think, is more of the well-known statutes that we have.
So we have we have multiple law enforcement agencies here, multiple prosecution teams that might have dual jurisdiction. How do we distinguish what's going to go federal and what's going to stay state?
That is, it's on a case-by-case basis, and that's really on a conversation that takes place both between the law enforcement officers as well as the U.S. Attorney's Office and the District Attorney's Office. So that could depend on a number of different factors, what the actual crime was. Maybe there's a state statute or a federal statute that fits a little better in terms of prosecution.
And you might know you're not a prosecutor. Are the penalties a little more severe or more severe on the federal side than they are on the state side?
Yes, they certainly can be.
They can be. So you almost reserve them for the most serious, outrageous cases if you're going to probably go federal. Would that be a fair statement or no?
If we're able to take it federally, and if that's something that the state and federal prosecutors agree is the best route to go, then certainly.
Yeah. That's something that we do, not just in hate crime cases, but in a large variety of cases, is collaborate with the U.S. Attorney's Office and with our law enforcement partners about where the appropriate venue lies. Some cases are going to be better proved in federal court than they are in state court, and vice versa. But again, going back to what I was saying earlier in terms of why we're focusing on also having our civil rights unit deal with district court as well. A lot of these crimes, as hateful and horrific as they might be, simply are never going to give rise to the level of a federal indictment, but we're going to take them just as seriously.
Thank you. And just, I got one follow-up. Juveniles, incidences of hate. I know we have tried to always use restorative justice and other mechanisms when possible on juveniles.
Mm-hmm.
Juvenile hate incidences, is there any different approach than if it was a juvenile compared to an adult?
No, not really.
Same analysis, same
that
we go through.
I would say, and I think, and this is just anecdotally, but I think thankfully, I think that the younger the age is, the less likely these sorts of things tend to happen. It's just not that animus hasn't built up yet, so we don't see it as much, but it certainly happens. But in all juvenile cases, we're always looking for what we can do to help the child, and we still have to enforce, we still have to prosecute when appropriate, but we're always looking to see what we can do to intervene, and we do that as much in these cases as we would in any other.
Great. Just back to the FBI, if you don't mind. What resources do you have in your office for victims of hate crimes or hate incidences?
Sure. So the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office have a victim assistance program. And once a person has been identified as a victim of a crime, we get them in touch with that program, and they will have a victim specialist that will work with them. And then really, depending on their needs, depending on the crime, we'll give them resources as they see fit.
And do you see this being underreported on the federal side? And do you think, if you do think it's underreported, do you think that people are afraid of deportation if they report something, especially to a federal agency?
Certainly, we would agree that it's underreported on the federal side as well for a host of reasons, right? Fear of retaliation, there might be a general distrust of law enforcement, and certainly on the immigration side, there might be a fear of deportation and getting involved with the federal agency. A lot of the hate crimes are reported through local and state law enforcement, and that's how the bulk of them get to us. But to that end, if it's not reported, we can't really do anything about it, right? So we would encourage folks to report it. You can always report things anonymously if necessary.
Great, thank you. Now I'm going to turn to my social service side, which is such a very important partner during any crisis. And certainly one of the first phone calls and emails that I reached out to was to the Anti-Defamation League for help and assistance in trying to figure out how can we support people within the community. At the time of this incident, I was probably stupid enough to have two hats, the chief of police and the town manager, so I had to worry about a lot moving this incident forward. So again, thank you for coming back to Winthrop, and again, glad to see you here in this forum setting than in a crisis setting. But can you tell us what you have seen as the trends in Massachusetts as it relates to hate crimes or hate incidences?
Yeah, and let me just say that it is really unusual that 2 years after a major traumatic incident, such as what happened in Winthrop, that people are willing to regather and really spend some time talking about the impact on a community, because it doesn't go away in a week, in a month, or after a rally, or after an indictment. And I think I know when we get to Meredith, you'll be talking more about that. But this is pretty unique, and I hope people who are listening take note of that. Now, in terms of Massachusetts, the ADL tracks numbers in a number of ways. We look at the number of anti-Semitic incidents, so not just crimes, but anything that is harassment, vandalism, or assault. And those numbers have gone up every year in the last, dozen years or so. And what is even more troubling to many of us in Massachusetts who think that we're sort of an enlightened commonwealth is that the rate of increase is higher than the national average. So that is data point number one. Number two, we track extremist activity. So that might be targeting the Jewish community, but it might be targeting the Black community, it might be targeting the immigrant community, it might be targeting the LGBTQ plus community. We are also seeing a spike in extremist activity, particularly extremist propaganda. Massachusetts ranks number 2, second only to Texas in terms of extremist propaganda. And the third piece, which is really the incident that we are talking about, is tracking and going deep into what these extremist groups are, what types of extremist plots and murders. And sadly, we were talking about this is a report you don't want to be on, but our report of extremist plots and murders. That number, while mercifully smaller, hugely disturbing, disruptive, upsetting to communities right now. There's a trial going on in Pittsburgh from the shooting of the Tree of Life. Again, an extremist-fueled violence.
And of course, you mentioned your report. Winthrop found themselves on that report after this incident. So it's obviously those types of incidences that makes and gets you on that report on a yearly basis. What do you think is the impact, A, of being on that report, and B, what do you think the impact is to our Jewish population after an incident such as this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think of it not so much as Winthrop being on the report, but the extremist who, allegedly perpetrated this horrible tragedy. It's about the extremists. To the extent it's about Winthrop, I think it's actually a story about how a community came together and responded long-term, like we're still talking about this today, how law enforcement at all levels were involved, how community groups were able to play a role in helping both the healing and with respect to the incident, to the extremism, helping identify some of the data points one needs to say, is this a hate crime? Was this particularly targeting a particular community? And, we were able to help in some small part by looking at some of the writings of this person and helping identify whether they showed some sort of anti-Semitic animus. And I suspect there are other things that we probably shouldn't talk about here right now, but that is just one example. There are groups in the community with expertise who can help build the case and show when something might meet that high standard of a hate crime.
What keeps you up at night?
I sleep well because I get to do this work every day and it feels really meaningful, and I get to do it with many people in the community, such as the people around this table who care deeply about it. I would be up at night if I felt that I was not surrounded by people who cared this much about these issues.
So you explained a little bit of how your organization does help law enforcement. How does your organization help community in
Yep.
healing or in education?
Well, some of the work that we do at ADL is more on the preventive side. So we do a lot of work in schools in terms of anti-bias education. So that's not just related to anti-Semitism, but it's bias in all forms. And being able to do that work, to designate schools, to take a pledge to be no place for hate schools, or actually go deep in the anti-bias work we do through some of our other programs, that's a really good age to get to younger people, to sort of build a base of anti-bias education. So that's an important thing that we do. And more broadly in the community, we'll provide resources and guides for how to respond when incidents of hate and bias happen. And we try to show up and be a good ally for other communities that are victims of these incidents.
Now, I'm going to ask you the same question I've asked the district attorney. Election season, do you see any increases during the election cycle than you would without the election cycle? Or has it been just steadily increasing over time?
I wish I could say I don't, but what I am seeing is sort of laced into campaign rhetoric, a lot of dog whistles that are targeting whether it's anti-Jewish sentiment, anti-Black, anti-immigrant, big spike in anti-trans rhetoric, and whether that messaging plays to someone's base or not, it's not for me to say, but that language is being normalized. And there are people out there who listen to it and they become emboldened to act. Now, I can't give you empirical evidence of that, but I'd say that there are plenty of people who are listening to this and it really means something to them and they do act on it. And that's what we should all be very concerned about. And to put a finer point on it, be willing to speak out against it when we hear it. It might not rise to the level of a crime. I think that was your point, DA Hayden, but the being able to respond and call it out is really important, particularly from our trusted leaders in the community.
Great. Is there anything you want to add that I haven't asked you? Because I know you're a wealth of knowledge, and I don't want to keep you confined to my questions.
Oh, thanks. I'm just going to make a pitch that I always like to make when I'm out here speaking for ADL. And that is, and this applies actually to reporting of any types of hate crimes or incidents. Report them, because there are people who don't believe that there is a problem. And sometimes they're more likely to believe it if they see the numbers, but unless we have the numbers, unless you have the numbers, we're not going to be able to move the needle on this.
Great. Thank you. And of course, I'll move over to my chairperson for the Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Public Relations for the town of Winthrop. Thank you for your services. I know it's all volunteer, and I know it's sometimes heavy workload and a little bit of thanks. So thank you for representing your commission. And again, I know you were thrown into this incident as well. How did you get involved, and how did you pull it together in such a short period of time? Because the incident happened on Saturday. You were probably called on Monday morning, and we said we're having a vigil on Thursday.
Sure. So fortunately for us, as we've discussed, the town really rallied during a terrible time. So it was not just the commission, it was with the help of the police, it was with the help of the community, it was help of the DA's office, everybody's office got involved to assist in that. So we have been very fortunate. You know, the commission came to fruition in 2020 in the middle of COVID. We were remote, online, having these meetings, and then a terrible tragedy happened in this community. So it was almost like, okay, we have the commission, and now what happens? And the commissioners and the community and state and local officials really helped us pull it together so that we were a unified front, so that people did know the commission existed for a purpose. Unfortunately, that purpose was brought to light very quickly, but we weren't going anywhere, and we were going to work tirelessly to ensure that our community remained safe for all.
Great. Now, I know you have openings on your commission. So can you tell us a little background of your commission? How many commissioners, how many currently serving, how many openings, and do you need people to apply?
Yes, we are actively recruiting for our commission. So we have 9 seats on the commission. Currently 7 are full, so we have 2 openings, but we also have terms ending in August. So we are hopeful that people will see this, or people will hear our cries from our commission meetings that happen monthly and want to join us in this work.
And how do they apply?
So they can go right onto the town website. There is a commission application. They can submit it to the clerk's office. Those then do get to the commission. We will have conversations with those who apply. We will work with the town council and with the town manager, and we will find the best fit to join us.
And who does the actual appointment? Is it town council?
So the town council does the official appointment. We are, as you said, a volunteer advisory commission. So my commissioners and I, we are there volunteering our time. So we do not have any jurisdiction to appoint. We can certainly recommend, and we will. And then the town council will make the final appointments.
If someone does apply, what can they expect their main function to be, I guess, as a commission as a whole? What are you working on? What's the next steps? I know everyone was eager to find out, if I apply for this, what am I going to be doing?
Absolutely. So I will say this. So we as a new commission are still trying to find our way. There is not a blueprint for this work. So we are finding ourselves, like, we have a commission meeting tonight. We are actually going to talk about the change in dialects in our community and what can the town do so that everyone is informed. We got a lovely mailer the other day about new trash bags, but it was only in English. So we know that there's a huge population of people in our community that a lovely QR code could bring them to another link that would bring them to the right language. So really looking holistically at the community and seeing where are our gaps and where can we assist. You know, we are not an event planning committee, so we are working towards that so that we will assist in all of the flag raisings, working with the town council on policy, things like that. But really, we are there to lend support if issues arise. It is a varied group with varied experiences. So again, you know, we are just trying to find our place in the community. We're working with public health, we're working with the schools, just to make sure that everyone is represented and represented well, and people also feel that there is an intermediary if they need one, that they can reach out to the commission if there are concerns and they need assistance navigating through our community to get resources.
Great. What can law enforcement do to help the commission?
So I think for us, and they do it when we call, the troops rally for us and show up. I think, you know, as we move forward, we will engage leadership to come out and perhaps do, maybe it's speaking engagements in the school, maybe it's, you know, maybe it's something for Women's History Month to highlight women in important roles. I'm smiling over there. I'm smiling over there, Agent. But really, just be present with us, because I think that the more that people realize that law enforcement is there to assist, and they are not there to dictate, or they are not there to come in and do whatever they have dreamed up, that it just makes it far more seamless. And I, as an educator, always go to our youth. The more positive interactions we can have with young people in law enforcement, the easier all of this becomes for all of us. So I think, as we think through engagement with our young people, to be able to bring people in to support us in that as well.
How do you think this incident affected the community? Obviously, I talked to very different people than you talked to, and some people might be reluctant to tell me how they feel in this community, but they might not be as reluctant to tell the commission or you personally. So what can you report on that, and how can we close that gap, I guess, to make people feel more welcome and more secure in Winthrop?
Sure. So, I think that there was a lot of shock. I think that, like most of us, everybody said, oh my goodness, this happens here. I think once the initial shock wore off, I think people were more like, we need to spring into action. Winthrop has a huge community pride, and it was great to see people kind of puff their chest out and say, well, this will not happen here. I mean, we all know that there are one-offs in every single community. So really, I think that what it did for our community was the cream rose to the top of the people and the local heroes, Meredith, you certainly being one of them for us, that were out in our community. But I also think that it made us realize we have a deep-rooted problem that we all have to wrap our arms around to be able to lift people up.
Thank you. We'll do a speed round at the end. Anything you want to add? We'll catch up to you again.
Thank you.
And Meredith, again, thank you, as always, for being there for law enforcement, as well as the community. Obviously, you were vital during COVID in providing COVID testing for law enforcement on a daily basis or hourly basis sometimes, depending on the need of the departments, fire and police. We worked together so closely during COVID for about 6 months, being you locked into a dungeon, dealing with the COVID response. And then I got to break away from you a little bit. And then this incident kind of dropped in the middle of that. Can you tell us, how did you get connected to this incident, and walk us through what your team did and how you prepared your team to do what you did?
Sure. So we've been working to. I consider myself very lucky that we've aligned with public safety since about 2013 through the opioid epidemic, which kind of set that foundational pieces that we knew how to communicate with each other. We knew how each one kind of works in our role. So that was opioid epidemic. We also, about 2016, realized that we couldn't do opioid work without mental health work. That kind of came together. We put a social worker on our team with our peer recovery coach. The police is, I think, the only police department in the Commonwealth, maybe even further away, that has a lieutenant that is assigned full-time to the health department. So we have a conduit to the data that comes out of police reports to identify folks that are in need, that are in crisis. A lot of trauma-informed training cohesively. COVID happened, like the chief had said. At that point, there was myself, Lieutenant Jajarian was there part-time. I'm also the public health nurse. So when that happened, and it happened very quickly, we all know that that week in March, you started on Monday, and your Monday looked way different than your Friday when the Commonwealth shut down. The chief said, we're going into emergency operations, ICS. I'm going to keep everybody off your back. He ran the logistics. I ran COVID. So, and then, but even during COVID, we were using our mental health work to do follow-ups when people were suddenly isolated and in fear that they were going to die from COVID. The police officer that is assigned to my office is highly skilled, highly trained in mental health counseling, so he was doing follow-up. So we were using whatever bits and pieces we could put together. So when this happened, first off, I had such a heavy heart for the victims, and then a heavy heart for my friends in law enforcement and my friends in public safety, because this is such a small community. It's it's that 6 degrees of separation. Winthrop goes away. It's 2, maybe 3. So you could feel the heaviness in the community in the hours after and the days after. And so I reached out to Chief on Sunday morning, and I said, how can I help you? Did you sleep? Do you need food? And then we started talking about the trauma that kind of comes through this. And my concern was recognizing that we were still in the quagmire of COVID and looking at how our community, in the first few months of COVID, we were very cohesive and people were very loving towards each other. By April, May, June of 2021, we were seeing those cracks where it was, why are you having me masked? There was just infighting within the community, and you could see the effects of the traumatic impact of an extended pandemic. And how was our community that was low on resiliency then going to bounce back from this? We were not in a great point, any of us were. And so we just kind of pulled together with what we've been doing all along. And, we have a recovery coach and being mindful that there are folks that are going to be much more vulnerable to substance use in those weeks after, and getting our recovery workers out on the street and making sure that they're making contacts and that they're all kind of piecing that together too. And then it just kind of rolled out from there.
So you ended up going door to door in the impacted area, and we thought we had it sufficiently covered.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was that was a half a mile length between, and Winthrop is very congested. We're one of the most congested communities in the Commonwealth. There were kids that were on the street that day. There were, we had the victims. So and I'm interested in, there's not a lot of research around the impacts of community trauma, especially durational community trauma. We see a lot of the research being on, violent crimes in inner city, but for a community like Winthrop, we're not really. So where was the playbook? We didn't have that play set of what are we going to do? So we just kind of started at the beginning and said, okay, let's start with the victims. Let's get the police reports. And, we were getting names and outreaching to them. And then it was okay, let's go along the route of the crime. When we just door knocked.
And when you say victims, I just want to intervene. There were other victims that were not harmed that day.
Yep.
Specifically, there was a child in a car with the father
Yep.
that suffered some traumatic experience, and that's the victims you're speaking of. I just want to be clear.
Yeah, these victim witnesses and these folks that that were either really close to it or had even just hearing a gunshot that day it causes some hurt to the soul. So and we didn't, when we were out walking on that day and really doing these door knocks, and we were using the tactics of psychological first aid. So people really needed to offload something, and we felt once people kind of offloaded that day, what their day looked like, they were able to kind of move on from it a bit. And for folks that weren't direct witnesses but just happened to be in the area, the vicinity. And then we kind of went out from there. So it's this idea of using socio-ecological modeling, where you're looking at the individual, the interpersonal. So, police and fire, they have a really good stress system. But their system doesn't necessarily encompass their spouses, their children, so we were holding space for those folks in the interpersonal kind of, because that was also shocking to them. And most of our police department, fire department, they live here in town, so their kids are in school here, and their spouses often are either working or very well known in the town. And so it's it wasn't my partner, but it was my best friend's partner that was there on scene. And so it's we were hearing a lot of these conversations, and we felt it was important to hold a safe space for folks that they could just kind of process that and then move on from it. And then, kind of went up from there. We've done some surveying. We're trying to, do some community-based research on it as to what it looks like in a community that isn't urban, high violent crime.
And I think that's a great point you make, that we always worry about the officer, the firefighter, the EMT, but we really don't go deep enough. And you did that. You went deeper to the family, to the children of the police officers, firefighters, EMTs, but you also went door to door on that route and worried about the community. I know what you opened the senior center one particular night with the assistance of the district attorney's office, and so you're done. I want to make sure we mention that as well. And most important, I think, what did we do after for the BIPOC community, and how was that set up, and was that successful?
Yeah, so I will say that it was very intimidating being a white person trying to lead this, right? And so leaning on those that know better, the commission, leaning on the district attorney's office, to really understand, and really they gave me a good foundation to keep my feet on the ground of how am I going to talk about this in our community? What do I have to bring to the table? And then we reached out to consultants to provide the technical assistance that really to create affinity spaces for the BIPOC community, to create affinity spaces for the Jewish community, to first kind of talk about that together, because we were hearing from the community, well, we want to have an anti-hate crime, like anti-hate vigil and this and that, and what I learned was that sometimes that can be very traumatizing to the BIPOC community if you're not, like, the language, and I learned a lot, and I still have a lot to learn about language, and so we felt it was important to also educate about when people are holding mixed space, like how triggering language, and doing that education before doing those larger group settings, and it was successful on some realms. One of the things that we kind of got pushback for was that this individual that we presume perpetrated this crime was not from Winthrop, and then therefore hate doesn't occur here, and so it doesn't, and that was kind of a narrative that we were kind of trying to navigate, and the best way that we could kind of get it to stick a little bit was, but it visited, right? So like it can visit any of us. We might be visiting someplace and there could be hate there that we don't know about. So how do we all educate ourselves into the future of sorts?
Thank you. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think one of the things that, kind of in the continuing on, we've done work with the temple to get grants to put cameras outside of it, which has been really excellent because they're wonderful and I love being able to stay, like, the more we can do projects with them, the better. But in the long term, we're planning, we have a relationship with BU School of Public Health to do yearly surveys to measure how safe people feel in the community, to measure kind of the, adverse childhood experiences. We even saw that. We saw children that were direct witnesses in this event that also lost their home recently in a fire. So that's two really big things. And how do we, and because of this work, we were able to do very directed, immediate outreach to that family, like to put those resources, because we all know how challenging navigating mental health care is right now. So.
Thank you for all your work. And, again, as promised, we're going to go around quickly for closing thoughts. Before we wrap up, I'll start, of course, where I began before, District Attorney Kevin Hayden.
So, been thinking about that ever since you said lightning round. I guess, certainly we have a community, entire community that was harmed here, right? We have a Jewish community in Winthrop that could have potentially been the next target here. I think that's, most people know that. Over the course of this conversation, we've mentioned the actual victim several times, and I think it's important that we say their names, and that we remember who they are. Ramona Cooper and David Green, because it is in recognizing them and their names that we keep their memories alive, we keep who they are alive. And we have to remember they were heroes, right? They were public servants. They were people who had served this country. And David was acting heroically at the time, doing what he could to intervene, and when he unfortunately met his maker. So we have to remember their names. I think that's vitally, vitally important. And we also have to remember, particularly as we talk about the things we talked about earlier in terms of the rise of hate incidents and hate crimes, that as we come into an election season or whatever it is that results in these increases, that darkness can't cast out darkness. Hate cannot overcome hate, right? Only light can cast out darkness. Only love can overcome hate, and we must always remember that. And I think that what we have seen here in Winthrop in terms of response is a real picture of that. What's possible in terms of a community coming together and loving, supporting one another, but also supporting the people and the victims that were most directly impacted. I think of Mel King, a civil rights icon in Suffolk County in Boston, said, "Love is the question and the answer." And I remember very vividly when I left the tree planting ceremony in Winthrop here last year. I remember getting in the car. It was a hot day, right? I remember getting in that car and I remember wiping the sweat off my brow. I remember thinking, those are going to be the two best cared for trees in probably all of Suffolk County, right? And that's, that's important. That really matters, and it's important that we honor and tribute the memories of the people that we lost.
Thank you for those profound thoughts. And Lieutenant?
Chief, I think I'd be remiss not to take my opportunity to recognize the law enforcement response. First responders, the investigators, they were thrust into a very difficult situation, and they conducted their business in a professional and thorough manner. I think the residents of Winthrop should seek some degree of comfort knowing that the level of professional police services they get in this town is something special.
Thank you. Thank you. Agent?
So first, I just want to reiterate what's been brought up multiple times, the importance of reporting these hate crimes when they occur, either directly to police departments or to the FBI, and that can be done by calling the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or online at tips.fbi.gov. Secondly, I know that this was just such a tragedy that hit the community 2 years ago, but I just want to say that it sounds like Winthrop has something to really be proud of in the way that the community responded, in the way that you all have continued in your efforts to remember the event. And with events like this, I just think that that is truly special, and I congratulate you all and commend you on that.
Thank you, Agent. Peggy, anything else?
Sure. Two things I think I want to say that has not, things that haven't yet been said. Extremists tend to have an outsized influence in a community. You know, you can have 3 masked men holding a hateful banner over a freeway overpass, and it strikes fear in the community. But don't let 3 people have an outsized influence in your own community. And the way to do that is something that everybody has the power to do, and that is to call it out. That is to reach out to the community that's targeted, because it is such a feeling of intimidation and isolation when you are the target, and say to them, you know, you are welcome here, you are included here, we want you here. So that is one point. The second one is something that came up a little earlier in our conversation, this lack of belief that this could happen within our own community, and it must be someone from the outside. And I get this a lot when I talk about the numbers in Massachusetts. People think, like, it must be people who come from the outside and cross the borders. Well, there's nothing that magically happens when they cross the state border or a city border. Extremists are among us. Hateful people are among us. People are emboldened to act on their hate in ways we haven't seen as a country. And recognizing that is something that is, I think, going to be really important to our ability to confront it as a community.
Thank you. Andrea?
Sure. So I think my plug right now is please help us and come get involved. We get a lot of pushback about what do we do and what is our role. We encourage people to join the commission and find out with us, because we are short 2 commissioners right now, and I think we have 2 rolling. So we will have 4 open seats. So I do hope that the community wants to join us.
Thank you. And Meredith?
I just want to say thank you for, continuing to include public health in these conversations, and knowing that there really is a place to align with public safety, and to do that kind of that deeper work and that more consistent continuum of work, which has been excellent. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. Before I close, I guess I get the final say, right? As the moderator, I just want to, let the Cooper and the Green family know that our hearts and prayers are still with them and with David and Ramona. We are committed to never forgetting what happened here in Winthrop, to always reflect back and try to become a better community. But also to thank Ramona and thank David for their service. They both have served either the country or state on both aspects for some. So thank you for their service, a long history of service to the United States and to the state of Massachusetts, and being valuable assets here locally as well. David was a constant person that people would approach and talk to and get advice from. So, that's a wonderful memory to have of them. And to thank them for that service, but also thank my officers and firefighters and EMTs that responded that day, and also to include in that thank you is Sergeant Nick Patano, who isolated the threat that day and stopped the threat. And we're certainly happy that he's a member of our police department. We're happy that no law enforcement officers were harmed that day, but we're saddened that 2 innocent citizens were certainly harmed that day. So before we leave, I wanted to remind everyone that there will be a dedication of a bench at the intersection of Shirley Street and Veterans Road on June 26, 2023 at 6 p.m. Phil Ronan, our veterans agent, is the person who's organizing that, so please reach out to him if you have any questions. And of course, I wanted to thank my distinguished panel for having this conversation filled with a wealth of knowledge. For those who are experiencing either hate crime or a hate incident, let's remember to stand up for one another and unite and not be divided by radical ideologies. As we leave, I wanted to replay a portion of a video that was taken by a news crew that day on June 26, 2021. During the event, when a person who was interviewed captured the essence of that day perfectly. And now we'll show you that video.
One thing I really find remarkable is the flag. I find that remarkable because you've been seeing in the news Black Lives Matter clashing with Blue Lives Matter, but it's like, this was an attack on Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter.
Thank you for watching, and we hope to bring you more programming, either on policing issues or social issues in the future. Again, we hope to reconvene on some other issues that we might have, and we might need to have the public knowledge and transparency about what we do. So thank you all for joining me. Have a good day.